Hello, and welcome to the Cool Explorations podcast. I am Tony Peters, your host, and today we are talking to Barry Adkins. He is someone who's going to talk about Kevin's Last Walk. It's a book he's written, as well as he has a foundation set up where he talks about his son's overdose and dealing with that and the trauma that he dealt with and how we can move past that. So I hope you enjoy listening to him today. Subscribe to this podcast to get exclusive access to the after show Shooting the Breeze. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cool Explorations podcast. I am Tony Peters, your host, and today we have Barry Adkins, and he is going to talk to us about his son and the program that he started up called Kevin's Last Walk. So why don't you start off by just telling us who you are and what you are doing right now?
My name is Barry Adkins, and honestly, the best way to describe me is I'm not the right guy to be here. I never had any intention of ever speaking at schools or churches or any of that kind of thing. I'm just a regular guy that just had something happen to me, and it changed my life.
Yeah, we all have those, like we were discussing before, we all have those moments that just kind of change the direction that you're going and help you to focus on maybe what God wants you to be doing. And doing that work is very important. So thank you for doing that work. I would love to hear your testimony before we get into discussing your son.
You know, my testimony is pretty simple. I grew up Catholic. And then realized I wasn't getting what I needed out of that and moved over to a non-denominational church. And that really changed things for me. Honestly, my testimony revolves around what happened to me about 3 days after the death of my son. It isn't that I didn't know God before, but I was angry with God, right? And I told him so. And basically what happened was I was laying in bed when I felt what I can only describe as a presence in the room. There was a light I'd never seen before and haven't seen since. The message was clear. Kevin didn't suffer, and that something very good would come from this. Why God chose me for this message, I don't know. I'm not the right guy, but as my wife has pointed out to me, God chooses the unimpressive to do his work, right?
Look at Moses. Yeah.
And it was a game changer for me. I knew God before, but I didn't know him like that. That completely changed my life.
Yeah, and I understand that completely. As we were discussing before, I've had those God moments, and I've definitely had a few of those moments where you're just like on the floor, humble, like you can't get up. It's like God's telling you something, and you're gonna listen because
yes,
when God speaks, you listen.
It's interesting because he does it that way, but then there's also, as I've come to know, there's that still small voice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a very gentle nudge, and sometimes, as I like to say, it's a whack on the head.
Yeah.
And I would describe what happened to me as a whack on the head. Said, "Hey, sit up. I got something for you."
Yeah, I had one of those moments that I posted on my Facebook. My status was when you ask God for an answer as to what direction you should be going, and God just comes right up and smacks you in the back of the head and says, "Here's your answer." And it's like, okay, answer found. Thank you, God.
I honestly did not. I mean, I wrote about it in the book, but I didn't tell the story very often because I was afraid people would think I was crazy.
Yeah.
My wife was in the room. It didn't happen to her. She was there. This was a thing, the light, I'll never forget, but it was one of those things where you're just afraid people are going to go, meh. That guy's a whack job.
Yeah, God works in mysterious ways, and we can't possibly claim to understand how he works, because he has his way, and he's all powerful. He's all knowing. He knows our thoughts,
Yep.
and he knows what is going to work with us,
Yeah.
and what isn't going to work with other people. So I understand that. So now with your son, tell me what happened leading up to your son's alcohol overdose, and then discuss a little bit about the overdose itself and what that was like for you as a parent to have to go through.
Well, let's walk through that. So, Kevin had just graduated from high school. He got a job making good money. I agreed to co-sign a loan so he could buy a new truck. Unfortunately, I had to go down to a dealership to sign papers. I walked in there, and of course, we know at a car dealership, they're going to sell us stuff we don't want. One of the things the guy asked me right off the bat was, how about some life insurance? And I'm that guy. I'm that guy that rather indignantly told him that 18-year-old boys don't need life insurance because they don't die. But I was wrong. They do die. He wouldn't live long enough to make a single payment on that truck. So a couple of weeks after he bought the truck, he decided he wanted to move out. I did my best to discourage him because honestly, we really never had any problems with him. His high school principal didn't even know who he was. And I considered that to be a good thing, right? But a couple of weeks later, his buddy Craig came over and they started the process of moving out. He threw a bed, a TV, and a dresser in the back of his truck. That was his idea of moving out. I walked out front with him like I normally do, gave him a hug, told him I loved him and be careful, and watched him drive away. It was the last time I saw him alive. That night, they threw a housewarming party for him. Started with a keg of beer and moved on to shots. Sometime around midnight, he left a voicemail for his sister talking about how drunk he was and how he loved his nephew Colin more than anything in the whole world. You listen to voicemail, you think, well, not a big deal. He passed out a short time after he left that voicemail. The kids at the party laid him in his bed on his side in case he vomited. The party was still going on. They actually went in and shaved his head and his legs while he was passed out. Yeah. But his buddy Craig was worried about him and kept going back in to check on him. Around 4 a.m., calls started coming into 911. First calls were difficulty breathing. Next calls were not breathing. My son died alone in a hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed. The next morning, Sunday morning, my wife and I are sitting around drinking coffee, talking about what we're going to do that day. About 8:30 in the morning, the doorbell rings. I open the door and I see two police officers and someone in plain clothes standing at my front door. Should have been a big red flag, right? I should have known that, but I'm that guy. It didn't even occur to me that something bad had happened. I actually joked with them as they came in, thinking this had to have something to do with a dog or a parked car. I just didn't know. But they didn't laugh at any of my jokes. One of the officers and the person in plain clothes stayed by the front door. The other officer walked in to our living room and he said that your son is dead. And we asked who, and they said it was Kevin. And they handed me his driver's license. There's something pretty final about it when an officer hands you your child's driver's license, because until that exact moment in time, you're holding out hope, man. You're holding out hope that this is all a big mistake. They've misspelled the last name. They need to be on the other side of town, or at least next door. But when they hand you your child's driver's license, you know he's gone.
Yeah, and I don't envy those police officers at all, because that has got to be the worst part of their job, has got to be giving that news to family members. So shout out to all the officers out there for the work that they do, because I don't envy that job at all.
I'm sure they remember every one of them. This guy, I actually ran into him a couple of years later, and he said that was the first one he ever had to do. And he said, I'll never forget it.
No, no, and that definitely has to be something that sticks in their mind.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I know that would stick in mine. I
Yeah.
don't know if I could handle doing that all the time.
No, no.
So as a parent, how have you managed to keep going after this experience?
Well, as we talked about earlier, the first few days were pretty rough, right? Because you just got to do a lot of stuff. You've got to go to a funeral home and plan for a memorial. You've got to do all of these things. But God knew that I was in trouble because I was, right? I was, it's just unimaginable. Everybody says, I can't imagine. And I say, yes, that is correct. You can't imagine. But the phrase, something very good will come from this, has what that's made all the difference in the world. Because if you think about it, when bad stuff happens, that's really all you can do, is to try to make something good come from it.
Yeah, yeah, and funerals are even harder when it's not expected. Like at least when someone's a little older or has been ill, you've had time to prepare for that mentally, as well as get some of those funeral preparations started. It's still not easy, but at least you have time to mentally prepare. So I know you didn't have that time
Yeah.
to mentally prepare, and so that has to be harder. Um, so through all of this, how have you kind of seen God at work?
He's at work everywhere. Um, you know, when you lose a child, it's very common for your life to go downhill after that. There's lots of stories out there about turning to alcohol or drugs, uh, bad feelings in the family, uh, your marriage. In our case, we made a decision early on uh, with my kids that, we're not going to play the blame game. There's no money in playing the blame game. Um, we've taken this opportunity to actually move closer. It hasn't divided us. It's made it closer. It made us closer, and that's a God thing. I really believe it.
Yeah, yeah. I know my own son has some health issues, and for us, that's like even watching him go through some of this, the pain and stuff he's been through. I go through pain every day of my life. I'm used to it.
Right.
I've been dealing with it since I was like 17 or 18, dealing with excruciating pain. But when I see my son going through it and he's 10, it's harder because he wants to be physically active and play and do things. And so, yeah, for us as a couple, it's been stressful. But like you say, there is no point in the blame game, and God will get us through it. God's going to guide what happens, and I feel like He's done that with your relationship too. Like He's guided it and helped you get along with it. So I'm glad to hear that you've grown closer together because of this. And I know God seems to use bad situations for good. That's a common theme throughout the Bible and throughout even my own life, and so many other people I've interviewed throughout their lives. How have you seen that happening through everything that's gone on? God using this bad situation for something good.
Well, the first thing I want to mention, we were talking about pain there. I was just talking about that with my wife. There's a phrase out there you've probably heard: pain is fertile ground for radical change. Don't waste the pain, man. Don't waste the pain. And really, for me, it's been a focus of getting out and telling a story. I don't get up and tell people how to live their lives. I just want them to hear the story so that it doesn't happen to them. And really, that's honestly been my mission since July 10th of 2005.
Yeah, and people don't really realize just how detrimental alcohol can be in your life until it's too late. It's at a point where you can't stop drinking, or you can't stop taking drugs, or if it's an addiction to porn or anger, you get to a point where you just can't stop. And that awareness is key, is getting that message across that it is dangerous. You do have to use a lot of caution when you're drinking, and a lot of restraint, because all it takes is you going too far once. uh,
Once.
yeah, and sometimes that's all you get, is that one time. And so I think, as a church, we need to focus a lot more on helping people with addiction, and not kind of covering it or ignoring it. So how, as a church, do you think we could go about preventing more of this from happening?
For me, uh, I think it's talking about it. Talk about real stories. I mean, there's a number of parts, and everybody kind of, some people in the audience will react to something I say. You tell the same kind of story or talk about your story. Someone else in the audience might pick up on that. I think a lot of churches, they do have, AA in their church, and people go there for those meetings, but it's not discussed uh, in the main church, in a
Yeah,
service or that kind of thing. And I honestly don't know why that is. At least here, uh, people are very hesitant to bring it up and just, talk about it. Have somebody come in and tell stories. Have, um, it- you know, decision making is a big part of your life, and you need to understand that. I argue that the two most important decisions you're ever going to make are about drugs and alcohol, with the exception of following Jesus. Um, it's a big deal. And I think you put it out there and talk about it, and let people hear stories, because as I always say, if somebody dies of alcohol poisoning in New York City, unless they're famous, you'll never hear about it,
yeah,
right? If it happens in the state or in the province, if you happen to catch the news, you might see it. But if it happens in your house, now you know.
yeah.
Now you know it's a real thing. And uh, I think it's important to talk about it. I'm very passionate about telling the story. I'm not preaching to them. I'm not telling them, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. Look, here's a story. You decide what you think you should do about it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so open with sharing my own testimony, and I've done so on my channel before. And actually, I want to do a follow-up one with an updated testimony here, because it is important to talk about the different things that affect your life, and the different events that go on in your life that shape you. Because through that, like you say, it might touch one person's testimony might touch one person, somebody else's might touch another person's. And that's what's important, is reaching people with that. And that's why the Bible focuses so much on like Jesus was always sharing and telling, teaching and all that. And I think we as Christians, oftentimes we fail in that, and we're so hesitant to talk about our faith because it might offend somebody. And I'm of the opinion that I'm going to say what I want. It's my show. And if YouTube wants to take it down, they can go ahead and take it down, like they've done a few times. But I'm not going to back down on my faith. And I think that is very important. And it's the same with addiction, and talking about that. Don't back down on it. Keep doing what you're doing, speaking up about it, because that's the way you make change, is speaking up about it.
Yeah, I
So
mean, the Bible talks about it in several places, and I don't have chapter and verse right now, but the only thing I can think of right off the top of my head is we don't have to go any further than the Lord's Prayer.
yeah,
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. I mean, they must have thought it was pretty important.
yeah. Well, and we're told that our body is a temple. and that we're to treat it like a temple. And if we're with addiction, we're not treating our body like a temple. And we need to remember that the Holy Spirit is on us. God knows what we're doing, what we're thinking. So that is very important to keep in our mind, that God knows this stuff. And through him, we can get through this. Through him, we can overcome our addiction or our issue, our struggles, our grief. We need to just turn to him and put it in his hands. And it's hard to do at times, but that is very important to remember.
Yeah. Yep. I absolutely agree. It's you can't do it all on your own. As much as society teaches you that you got to be big and tough and do this and do that, that's just not true.
Yeah, so I always hate the saying that where like men don't cry and that kind of stuff. I'm just like, there's no shame in crying. If you want to cry and show emotion, show emotion. If you're one of those stoic people who don't, that's up to you too. But I always say there's no shame in crying, and sometimes crying is the best way of actually dealing with some of these situations, to just let it out instead of bottling it up.
Yeah, I mean, this is roughly 17 years in the rearview mirror for me, and still sometimes when I tell the story, there's moments where it's just all I can do, and my voice will break up a little bit, and I know it. But it's a very, very raw, taking somebody to the most painful moment in your life. Uses a different part of your brain. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, God gave us emotions, and they're there to help us deal with situations. So I think suppressing a lot of that sometimes just does more harm than it does good. So I think families who are going through this, they need to know that it's okay to cry. It's okay to have emotions or be angry. It's okay to be angry. Focusing that anger and frustration or sorrow into the right avenue, that's what's going to bring healing. And that's a message I got from my counseling, so I'm not taking credit for that. That's something I got from counseling. I think as a church, we need to focus a lot more on helping people who have gone through losses, whether it's a child or a parent or a sibling or a spouse. We often fail our families in terms of providing the right accesses to that. I know our church had for a while, I don't know if we still do, I don't think we still have grief sharing, but we had a grief sharing group where they could go and they could just share their grief together and bring healing. And there was a counselor there who was helping run it. And I think as churches, we need to do a little bit more of that. Would you agree?
With grief sharing, it's a tricky subject. Grief is another subject, but sometimes with grief sharing, it can be kind of depressing to go in and listen to all of these sad stories. And that's why, for me, I think having people together that, have grief and then do something about it, do something very good. What can you do? Because, as Jesus taught us, giving is where it is. Giving and serving is what you should be doing. Grief sharing to a point is okay, but it can be depressing. And one of the things, I've had conversations about grief with certain people, and what I tell people about grief is that when your loved one dies, in my case, my son, the old you died with him. The old you died. And it takes a long time to figure out that you're never going to feel the way you did before. That's what everybody wants to do. They want to feel the way they did before. At least I did. And I think that's a fairly common thing. A new you is born, just as the Bible talks about. Um, it's up to you to make that new you better through God and His ways, because you're just never going to get back to that point.
Well, and without pain, like you were saying before, like we don't have that growth, and that spiritual growth. And so when we have that grief, being able to speak with counselors is, I think, key,
Mm-hmm.
who can help you get through that and understand what's going on and help you get to that point where you can deal with that anger and that sorrow in a good, positive manner, and have that outlet for release. And counselors are great at giving that outlet,
Yes.
especially Christian counselors, because they give you more biblical ways of actually dealing with it, and not being ashamed to talk about it, because there is no shame. You're going to grieve. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And
uh,
we all do that a little bit different. Yeah.
yeah, that's so true. So now you have the opportunity to talk to young people and help them realize that experimenting with drugs and alcohol can be dangerous. um, how does that feel to be able to make that influence and that impact on young people's lives?
For me, that's what it's about. People often say that must be difficult to get up there and bare your soul in front of hundreds of people. But for me, the satisfaction of knowing that people know that story and they might make a better choice in the future. Um, it's a great healing thing, and that's as we were talking about grief, that's part of the healing process. Um, just talk about him, talk about what happened. I don't think I mentioned. So after he died, um, we decided to have him cremated, and I went down to the funeral home to pick up his ashes. And you walk into a funeral home and there's nice pictures on the wall and they're playing music in the background. I walk into a funeral home, they sit me down in a big comfortable chair with a desk in front of me. The funeral director walks in, sets an urn down in front of me. An urn that holds all the remains of the kid that I burped, changed his diapers, coached his baseball, soccer, football, taught him to shoot a gun and swing a golf club. All that remains of him were sitting there in front of me. And there's one thing I knew at that point, and that was that I didn't want to be a victim. So the world doesn't need any more victims. The world needs people who take something bad and they make something good come from it. And honestly, I thought about, well, what would I want somebody else to do if it happened to their kid? And for me, it was just to get out and tell the story.
Yeah,
Not
where
to go
where
ahead.
can people find that story? So I know you're online.
So I actually have, there's a book, Kevin's Last Walk. It's on Amazon. On Facebook, which is the main thing I check all the time. It's Kevin's Last Walk, all one word, on Facebook. And then the website is Kevin's Last Walk as well. There's lots of different things on there. I post on there occasionally. I'm not the greatest at social media. I'm a generation away from that. I do it, but I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. If you search "walk to Montana" or my name, stuff comes up.
Yeah, I've started a few websites, and I always fail to upkeep them because it's a lot of work to upkeep them. I find Facebook groups are a little bit easier, so for my cool explorations, I've just started a Facebook group for it, and it's just easier to be able to update on there.
Yeah, and people check, they'll see it, on the website, then they have to subscribe, and not that many people subscribe. I primarily post the stuff I do on Facebook.
Yeah, and I'll post a link to your Facebook group in the description so people can find it there and find you
Cool.
there. What advice would you have for young people who are out there experimenting with these drugs or alcohol?
It's dangerous business. Um, the, we can all say, wait until you're 21. I really think you should before you take a drink, because the younger you do it, the more likely you are to become addicted. And, these people that a lot of it's peer pressure, right? The way, like, kids generally don't like to admit to peer pressure, but we know it's there. And the interesting thing for me is that in high school, you have all these high school friends that you think you need to impress. You talk to somebody who's been out of high school for 10 years or 40 years in my case, I'm still in contact with two people from high school. I don't know how long, you tell me, I don't know how long you've been out of high school, but how many people from high school are you still in regular contact with?
It's a small community. I live in 20,000 people here, so
So you do see them around?
I do see them around. Yeah.
Yeah. I,
But in most cases you wouldn't.
yeah. Well, you probably see them around, but you don't hang around with all of them all the time.
No, there's only a handful that I would say I know what's going on in their life.
Correct. That's my point, is that uh, you think you need to impress these people, and you don't. You don't.
Yeah, and being cool is often the exact opposite of being cool.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So, last question: what advice would you have for families who their kids are experimenting, and that they're experimenting with alcohol and drugs? Because there's a lot of parents who don't do anything about it; they just kind of ignore it and be like they're kids. What advice would you have for those parents?
Well, it can happen to you. As I said, I'm that guy, right? Um, what I tell, because talking to kids about drugs or alcohol is hard. And, okay, we're going to sit down and talk about this today. Uh, yeah, maybe that works in some cases, but the advice I give both kids and parents is, okay, you're not comfortable about talking to your parents, you're not comfortable about talking to your kids about drugs or alcohol, but you can talk to your spouse with the kids in the room about it. Lots of examples in the news. You can set up Google alerts and have all kinds of stories about drug deaths or alcohol deaths. Talk to your spouse about it with the kid in the room, because you mentioned you have kids. Kids are listening to what you say all the time. They don't want to be talked to generally. I'm not sure if your kids have gotten to that age. They don't want to be talked to, but they're listening all the time. They know what you're talking to your wife about.
Yeah.
They know. So you don't have to talk to them, but you can talk about it with your spouse. And with kids, what I tell them is, yeah, no, you don't want to bring it up, but they can let you overhear a conversation with a friend.
Yeah, it's like my son, he's 10, so at school he's been learning about puberty, and he doesn't like the word puberty, so he calls it puberty. Um, and every time we bring it up, he's just like so embarrassed, or whatever, and I'm just like, I start mentioning different things about puberty, like in a joking manner.
Right.
And it's like, well, the message is getting across. And so I did a little short video this morning, 20-second video to I'm not sure if you've seen the Encanto movie, but there's a
No,
song
yeah.
there's a song that goes, "We don't talk about Bruno," because it's like a somebody that they don't want anything to do with, because it's a faux pas topic. So I called it, "We don't talk about puberty." No, no, no. And then I ended it with, "Wait, girls go through puberty too? We definitely aren't talking about that." Because that's the attitude my son takes. So I'm gonna embarrass my son. I'm gonna put out a video for this. So I posted a short little clip this morning of that on TikTok and on my other YouTube channel, Word Explorations. And it was just kind of a fun little thing. So I told my son I would do it, and he laughed about it. I didn't think he didn't think I was serious. I'll show it to him tonight, and he'll probably be like, "Dad, seriously."
Yeah, you get a little less cool when you become a teenager. But to your point about kids, you know, people will often ask me, when should I start talking to my kids about drugs and alcohol? Mm, I don't know. The easy answer to that is just don't wait until it's too late.
No, and we've kind of brought it up here and there with our kids. Never like a dead serious like conversation, but just the biblical stance that it's okay to have a drink.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. The Bible is not opposed to that. Jesus drank wine. What the Bible has a problem with is overindulging. And that is where the problem comes in, and that's where deaths come in or hospitalization. I had an overdose just in the last year with my own medication that I was taking because I
Oh,
was, yeah, I ended up in the hospital. My wife came home because I wasn't responding to any of her messages, and she gets worried because I have seizures, so she gets worried. So she came home and found me like comatose on the
oh,
couch. Yeah, and it's just because I it was morphine. I took one, and it didn't stop the pain that I was going through. I was in extreme pain, so I took another one, and then I took another one, and then I lost track of how many I took, and ended up overdosing. So now I don't take morphine anymore. I don't take a lot of those like heavy narcotics because I'm like I don't want to experience that again or put my wife through that again. So it's easy to do. It's very easy to do, and it's something that does need to be talked about.
yeah, yeah. Pharmaceuticals can be very good, but they can be very bad. Honestly, I refuse to take any opioids just because of all the stuff we've heard. And a doctor told me years ago, and I followed this. He said if you alternate Tylenol and Advil, you get the same effect. You just have to take it exactly when you're supposed to take it. And I've been through surgeries. My wife's been through a major surgery, and Tylenol and Advil, and believe it or not, it works because, again, back to the addiction thing. These products are good, but they can be dangerous.
Well, and your body develops a tolerance to it. So
Yep.
that's why with me it was like it wasn't doing anything. My body was so tolerant to morphine that it didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
And that's when you get the overdose. Is because you're trying to get to where it's actually doing something for you, and it's not. And that's why they say when you get high, you're never going to reach that same high again. You're always going to be chasing that high. And that's where people run into issues. And it's the same with alcohol. It makes you feel good at first.
Yep. Well, Tony, I would say that you're probably in the same boat that I am. You need adult supervision.
Yep.
I tell everybody I need adult supervision all the time.
Yep. Yeah. And that's why it's like, I don't, if they were to offer me another prescription for that kind of stuff, I'd say, no, thanks. Like, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to put my wife through that again. It's too easy to do.
Yeah.
And I don't want to play around with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks for coming on.
You bet.
It's been a real pleasure. Again, I will put a link to your Facebook group in the description there.
Okay.
And thanks for being open and sharing with us
Yeah.
today.
I enjoyed it.
You have just been listening to an interview with Barry Adkins of Kevin's Last Walk, and you can find him on facebook.com/Kevin's Last Walk. And I encourage you to check that out, see what he's doing, check out some of the speeches that he's done, and we'll post some of his previous speeches on our podcast, and hopefully you'll enjoy watching those. Well, I have just been blessed with so many people who are requesting to be on the show, and I'm impressed with how many people want to share their testimonies or what they're doing for the Lord right now. If I haven't got back to you, I promise I will get back to you. I look forward to speaking with each of you and interviewing you, and keep tuning into the show. There's lots of new people that are coming on here, and if you're considering wanting to come on the show, just shoot me an email at tpeters745@gmail.com, and I will get back to you.